Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to look at a different side of what we offer our children. For the longest time, we drove home, you need to know your math, you need to know your science, you need to know your engineering. And a lot of kids really took it to heart. I'll admit I was one of those geeks. And we sometimes forget that there's the social side of it, that before you get a chance to go to a company and show your scientific abilities, you got to get in the door. And if you can't speak correctly, if you can't write a letter properly, you may never get past the pile of applications to show who you are. So tonight we're going to talk about the other side, not just the technical side, but the side that gives most kids and adults the chance to show their technical prowess. So let's start with introductions.
Hi, Al. My name is Kim Kerrigan. I'm president of Corporate Classrooms. I'm a co-founder of the company along with my partner, Steve Wells. And I guess my main role, aside from what I've said, is to be the chief training specialist for the company.
I'm Steve Wells, and I serve a dual role in the business. I take care of the marketing efforts as well as the information technology side.
But you come from the geeky side like I do.
Yes. I was an electrical engineer before we started this, but it's helped because some of our clients are, well, I mean, Citrix Systems is a major software developer, and it helped because we were able to adapt the material to where the people that we were teaching could understand it better.
You know, and again, I remember when I first went to Holy Cross, the year I started, they did away with core curricula. So you didn't have to take so many religious courses,
right,
so many English. And I fell into the pattern of this side of campus was good, that was dark. This side of campus, A plus B equals C. I got over there and took a philosophy or a sociology course, and well, unless B had a bad childhood, or A came from, it was like many answers. So I kept running back to do more chemistry. Me, who was never a math fan, I took enough math courses. I think I was one shy of a math major.
Wow.
It was either that or psychology or something. Okay, no, we're not doing that. And then years later, my daughter's going through a paper, and she asks my darling bride to edit it. And I said, "Do you want me to help?" She goes, "Dad, you have the grammar skills of a dead bovine." And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should have gone to that side of campus a little more. Tell me, what is the mission? I mean, corporate classrooms, is this training people to be CEOs?
In a fashion, I would say yes, we are, because we have found through the 25 odd years that we've been doing this, that all things considered, the number one deciding factor as to whether you'll get a position or a promotion is your solid communication skills, all things considered. And so, yeah, I think it does matter. Going back to the very beginning of Corporate Classrooms, our very first program was, and it sounds so lethally boring, but it was called, and is called, Get a Grip on Grammar. And we only, in those days, we only had one course. And we went and we tried to make it fun, because having been a teacher, early on I said, if I'm ever going to teach, I'm going to make sure that I'm as clear as I can be in explaining a concept, so that students will never get confused, as I was in high school. And so when I was teaching, I made that my mission. And when we ended up getting together and forming this company, Steve and I decided that had to be one of the tenets, that you make it so clear that they can't miss, because you're not dealing with rocket science, but you are dealing with some very important information that if you implement this information, you're going to be understood much better by people around you. So we took the grammar course, and believe it or not, it just took off. And the amazing thing for us was that, and this ties into how we got into the books. back in 1989, we were at a trade show in New York City, and it was called, the show was called the New York Secretary Show. I'm sorry, yeah, it was the New York Secretary Show, thank you. Okay, anyway, they asked if I would give like a 1 hour, 2 hour program on grammar. And I said, yeah, believe it or not, it was standing room only. And there were people all around, and I thought, this is amazing. But they really liked what we had to say. And afterward, a woman came up to me and said, may I speak to you? Can we go have a cup of coffee? I said, sure. And she was from Prentice Hall newsletters. And in those days, Prentice Hall published like 18, 20 different newsletters to different segments of the workforce. And so she was representing administrative assistants, and she said, tell me more about your company. So I did. And at the very end, she said, what can you tell me that we haven't discussed? I said, well, we're trying to put together a grammar book. We're first going to do it with subscription, and we'll see how that goes. And she wrote, we got about, 300 calls, people saying, I want to sign up. Well, then we started doing a subscription thing. Well, we were going nuts because the people who ordered in February, they needed, their third copy in May. But then where other people signed up in April, now they're on their second lesson, and we're trying to keep, well, we're going crazy. So we decided we're just going to convert this to a book. Well, right away, I guess the light bulb went on, and Steve and I were talking one day, and I said, we ought to call Prentice Hall down in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. That's all I knew about them. So I called, and this woman says, you got the wrong number, but here's a woman you should call. She's across the street in a different building. So I called, and the woman answered the phone, and her name's Ellen Coleman, and she said, do you have an agent? And I said, no.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And she said, I'm not supposed to talk to you unless you have an agent. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. She said, well, here. And it was like one of those 30-second speeches you have to give quickly. And she said, tell me about the book. And that you're writing. I told her about the Get a Grip on Grammar. She says, I like the idea. She says, let me bring this to our committee. And she says, I'll get back to you. A week later, she calls up and she says, first of all, and then by the way, this is February. And she said, by the way, is the book ready? And I lied through my teeth, really. And I said, oh, of course. Now at this point, we're like on chapter 6, okay? And we were going to have 12 lessons, okay? 12 parts of the book. And she said, good. She said, let me call you tomorrow. She calls back. She says, can you be here in 3.5 weeks? We want to meet you in Englewood Cliffs. We worked like we have never worked in our lives to finish this book.
Steve's saying, you said what?
That was pretty much it. Well, we did. We got it done. We worked many nights till 11 o'clock at night. This is night after night after night. Okay, but we got it done, brought it to them, and they took us on, and they sold all 1,000 copies, and that was their test marketing. And the rest is history, as they say, because we not only sold the grammar book, but then we wrote writing, and there was a book on speaking and listening, another one on finance and accounting for non-accounting professionals, and finally, supervision. And all 5 books did really well, and we had a 10-year run with Prentice Hall Direct. And then they were absorbed by Pearson in the year 2000. Unfortunately for us, Pearson at that point wasn't going into career development. But I mean, it just shows you how one little thing, and by the way, we probably really shouldn't have gone to that show in New York City because we could ill afford spending all the money for the booth, staying in New York City, because we were just starting out and we were living on credit cards, whatever. Well, anyway, we said yes, and because of that, we had a 10-year run. So, I mean, it really worked out well.
Now, Steve.
Yes.
Where in OrCAD does it say grammar?
Where in, I'm sorry?
In an AutoCAD or an
Oh,
OrCAD?
no, there is no
I mean,
such thing.
how do you convince an engineer or
Well-
a real techie?
Well, I had about 30 engineers working for me when I was working for this company in Chicago, and when you sit down with them and you try to beat out the information that they have in a logical fashion, it's tough work. They basically need a translator. But some of them actually did learn how to write, because we sat down to get the information together, they figured out, well, this is important, that's important, and then they finally got the concept that this is what I have to tell people in order for them to say, yeah, he does know something.
And to follow up with that, and I know Steve mentioned Citrix systems before, we trained hundreds and hundreds of Citrix employees. And the woman that, first saw the program, she came up to me and she says, I like it. And we ended up we started off, I don't know how many per month, but by the end, we've trained, I'm sure, at least probably 800 to 1,000 employees. I mean, they were having class after class after class. But the reason I bring this up is because one of the technical people, and they were all, versed in technology, every single class, and there wasn't a class that wasn't full, okay? And this woman said to me one day, she said, I'm really having a tough time. She says, I keep writing to my vice president about this answer I need to proceed with this project. But she says, I send an email and I don't get a response right away. And I said, well, this course is really going to help you, because we talk about the 6 steps of the U viewpoint in this course. It used to be called Get a Grip on Business Writing, but this is what we call it now, Sound Advice for Successful Writing. Anyway, the 6 steps, are all about being organized, being clear, being conversational, being personal, being creative, and being positive. And then all day I reinforce this with various exercises. Anyway, I said to her, you're going to learn how to appeal to your boss or any audience, because this is really going to help you. And this happened on a Thursday. She emailed me that Tuesday, the following Tuesday, and she said, it worked. She says, I got a response from I employed what you told me to do, and it did work. And we were really proud of that. And Citrix, short of bragging, there's just no other way to say this. We got rave reviews every single time, and that has been the truth for this course, because we're hitting upon things that people need to know. I stress this all the time. It is your responsibility as a writer, as it is when you're a speaker, to make sure the message you give is received in the way you intended it to be received. And that requires you to, read your own work, read it out loud. How does it sound? Is there a negative tone? Does it come across kind of iffy? Does it come across like you're really not sure of what you're saying? Then you need to go back and rewrite.
How do you get somebody essentially to edit their own work? Because when I have new salespeople, or even senior salespeople that I've got to tweak up, there's different ways people do it. I know how I do it is I put a camera and I tell them, close your eyes, videotape yourself, and then watch. And it's amazing how you start finding how many ums, how many ahs.
Yes.
Or some of the facial expressions. And by telling people to do it privately, I actually get them to do it, and they'll come back and say, oh my God, I didn't know I did this.
Yeah. It's so funny. When we start out, the first thing we do in this workshop is I give them a writing exercise to do. And then it's kind of like an exercise we're going to return to at the end of the day, and they'll see how far they progress, because now they see how they can add to the original piece of writing with the 6 steps we've covered. Anyway, when I get to the part about, I'll say, okay, what was your problem when writing? They'll say, oh, I had a tough time being an organizer. I couldn't think of the right word. Well, when I get to how important it is to be conversational and while being professional, invariably, most people say in class, oh my God, that's what you're describing as poor writing, that's me. Because they're saying things like, as per our conversation, or enclosed please find, for your information, and all of these, I say, get rid of this stuff. First of all, you don't say as per when you're talking to someone at the water fountain. You say during our discussion yesterday, you mentioned blah, blah, blah. Or you don't say enclosed please find, but there's a more grammatical reason for that. You want to say I am enclosing because it's active voice. And most of your professional writing should be written in the active voice where the subject performs the action. And as far as the other one, I said, for your information, it's redundant. Of course it's for their information.
Why else am I sending it to you?
Exactly. That's why you're communicating. And so I have a litany of these that we show on the overhead. And by the way, thanks to his great technology skills, I am able to show people some very vibrant technology in terms of our PowerPoint presentations. But anyway, there are 50, 60 that I share with them.
What is the biggest problem if you take a techie and you say the biggest problem they face is it too much jargon? I mean, I sat through a conversation listening to how we're doing this assay, and we can't decide if we want to do it by ELISA, RIA, you know, and you're like, okay, guys, wait a minute. Those little symbols. Well, the FDA is not like the EPA because they'll let us use RIA. Where, you know, it's like, do you really hear yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, but it seems like we all fall in love, especially on the biochemistry side, with sounding important. Yeah. You know, with all these big words. And what's the biggest problem you find on a techie?
Well, organization for one. You know, they're brilliant on, you know, the logic of making a circuit work and all of this, but when it comes down to putting a communication thing together, you know, they sort of get lost. They go this way and that way. And the other thing is when you have like a circuit and you're calling it the XYZ circuit and someone is saying, what is it? You know, you have to realize that you have to explain this so that people can understand it.
That's what I mean by jargon, because like we go down to the NIH and somebody spent their entire life studying one protein or the effect of a single enzyme, and they forget that most people don't understand.
That's right.
You know, or some of the presentations I've seen by EEs, if their boards were in the same logical order, the board would be 6 foot wide and have more circuits that cross.
In fact, I use as an example of what you're saying when I'm talking to a class, I'll say, and I can't remember the man's name, but I know he was in New York City working for a very famous research clinic, and I believe they worked, he was like a neurophysicist, and there was one day in the Boston Globe they mentioned him in a profile, and his instruction to his staff is, you should be able to speak so clearly about our work that you can go home at night and sit at the kitchen table and have your mother understand what we did here today. And if she understands, then you know what you're talking about. And that's really what we're trying to get people, especially in the technical side, to do, to make it so it's understandable to everyone who's reading the document or the email, whatever.
But isn't it hard to get techies to understand elegances in simplicity?
Yes. However, one of the things I'll say to them, we talked about this a lot, you haven't met anybody, or you haven't met a particular person, but you've received emails from her, say, and you think she sounds kind of abrasive or demanding or maybe even negative. Then you meet this person at a conference, say, and you say, wow, she's very warm, she's very nice. Where's the disconnect coming from? Well, what it is, I believe, is that she hasn't really found her writing voice, because her writing voice would be all over that document if she really were using her writing voice, because she should be conveying her personality on paper or electronically, and a lot of people fail to do that, and that's the problem. They don't really sound like the person they are.
Now, do you run into a lot of cross-cultural issues? You know, because had people who think, well, he's very cold. Well, no. The baseline for where they come from doesn't translate well.
Like a lot of cultures, they want to have small talk in the beginning of their emails or letters. And so you need to say, I hope all is well with you and your family. I hope you're enjoying the holiday season, excuse me, if it happens to be that part. And this came full circle to me. One time we were working with Chamberlain. They are the people who make the garage door openers, and they're out of Chicago. Great company to work with. And anyway, they had sent us down to Mexico to work at the Nogales plant. And I was giving, this is early on, and I was giving a workshop, and it started around 8:30. And around 9:15, I see someone, they're wheeling a cart with all these sweets and coffee, and everyone just got up. And I said, and I just stood there, and then one of the fellows said to me, oh, he said, this is the time we have our breakfast break. And he knew I was like, kind of befuddled. And he said, in the Mexican culture, this is very important. You socialize, and it's before you go on. And it's the same thing in writing. You need to kind of interact in a social, personal way. Not overbearing or, too intimate, but somewhat friendly and pleasant.
But how do you teach somebody where the line is? Because, we've all run into people who, what they write is not really what they meant to say. So how do you go and talk to people and say, you got to be careful. You can't say this is the silliest thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah. We get some hardliners who just want to tell it like it is. And we say, yeah, but see, one of our points in that book is to be positive. So you always start out positive, no matter whether you're dealing with something that's somewhat sensitive, unpleasant, or even negative. And then you end up on a positive note. And the way you segue into that is to say something positive, for example, about their workplace performance, and then say, while speaking about this issue, I would like to call attention to, and then you go into it. And then at the end, you again reassure the person that all things considered, you're doing a great job, but I need to see some improvement in this, let's say it's punctuality.
I was working with an engineer in Novosibirsk, and nicest person you ever did. But I remember in the middle of a conference, he said, that's stupid. And I was like,
Yeah, that would be.
afterwards I said, you got to be more positive when you talk to somebody about their idea. The next break he goes, that's positively stupid. And I pulled him aside and said, now, are you trying to insult them? No, I show respect. I know waste his time. It's a stupid idea. Let's move on. And it took forever to try and get him to understand why it was important.
Yeah.
That, look, Steve put a lot of time into this.
Yes.
Telling him he has a stupid idea. Not really a stupid idea, it's just in your opinion, it wasn't the right approach. He goes, now you waste his time. So, you wonder if sometimes the cultural divide.
Exactly. And as far as, obviously we're dealing with mainly American companies, but many of them have people from other countries and cultures. But we say, keep in mind, empathy is always behind this, because you have to put yourself in the shoes of someone else so that you understand what they're going through, because you don't always have all the answers about person's performance or their behavior at work. And so you give them the benefit of the doubt, and you write in such a fashion that you are giving them the benefit of the doubt. And this is not to say you excuse bad performance or bad behavior, but you do come across in a more constructive way when you're criticizing them.
But even some of the things we do as Americans, well, Steve, that's a home run.
Oh,
Okay, and you've
Steve.
got the person from Portugal looking saying, you go home now? What is home run?
Right. Go ahead.
Do you want to?
No, go ahead.
Okay. When we do the earlier things about as per for your information, cliches, okay? Well, we go cliches, redundant expression, then the third one is sports analogies. And we tell people, that's fine for your buddy in the next cubicle, but it's not good to say, we hit a home run, couldn't get to first base, struck out. Do not do that. And certainly stay away from things that are non-sports oriented but still confusing, such as pulling your leg, getting on my nerves, because we've had people like Koreans and Chinese people come up and tell me what is meant by getting on
Your nerves?
your nerves, or whose leg is being pulled.
I would never think to grab a part of your body.
I mean,
And you get, well, he said I pulled his leg. I would never do such a
Absolutely.
disrespectful thing.
and so we enlighten people. Now, you would think that most people understand this, but we were saying you always have to realize that don't presume that someone knows everything that you know in your head, and they're not going to interpret it unless you state it the way you
Well,
want
the
it
other
to be
thing
stated.
too is it's hard, especially being American. Next to the Russians, we're probably the most mono language culture.
Yes.
Business here is done in English.
Yep.
We can talk about Spanish, we can talk about French, but it's English. Here in the UK, people tend to speak English. And the problem is when you go outside of the world here and you enter the real world, there's all these other languages. And it's hard when you have to train people, at least in the sales field, say, understand, not only do they not understand American baseball, they're trying to figure it out in a second language.
Exactly. And which is another reason why we say to people, you want to simplify, clarify, because, again, what you just said, Al, not everyone's going to understand the nuances behind a particular word. So you make it as simple and clear as possible. It's not being condescending. You're not talking down to people. You're helping them, because when you read an email, if it's well written, you only have to read it once to get the main message. Okay? But if someone is like rereading, it's because they don't understand it. And you can always tell, by the way, if you see a long email, I will bet on this, that the majority of sentences are written in the passive voice, because it always makes it so much longer in the passive voice. Whereas if you get to the point with an active voice sentence, you can shorten it and condense most of your emails.
Well, I mean, you think about the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. We always joke that they will never say in a concise sentence what they can confuse you with a paragraph.
True.
They'll never say, do this.
And also,
Some of that's deliberate.
Well, you're being vague because they don't want to get cornered.
yes.
But again, I got a problem. If I'm dealing with you in a business relationship, I should be able to be concise and say, Stephen, I don't see how your idea fits. Now, stupid idea, right? In my opinion, you have stupid idea. But I don't see how it fits.
But picking up on that, and you mentioned this earlier about, is leadership, are communication skills part of, good leadership? And this is where I, take issue with some people. I think you need to make sure that in your writing, you're addressing issues with people. You were just talking, I lost my train of thought for a second. You mentioned something just before about being direct with people.
Yes.
And I feel that, as part of your leadership is to say something in a way that gives the person a chance for growth, not to reprimand them or not to make them feel small, but rather to elevate them and show them there is potential here to grow. I mean, that's to me what a good
And
leader
again,
would do.
when you think about it, the definition of leadership, I always love everybody's definition. The old Portuguese definition was getting people to follow you because they believe you'll make them successful. I'm not pushing you. I don't lead from behind and bludgeon you into doing something. If I'm doing my job right, you want to follow my direction. And why would you do that? Because you believe I'll help you get to where you want to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we have found over the years, people seem to go, I don't know if it's their mood or just their dictatorial style, but they just want to lay into people with an email and say, okay, I've had it with people coming in late or not answering phones, whatever. Whereas, wouldn't you get more proactive behavior from people if you said something, let's say people aren't at their desk on time or when they should be. So if it were me, I would start with an open-ended question. I'd say something like, what happens when only some of our employees project a can-do attitude? I've been wondering a lot about that lately as I walked around the office and noticed that people weren't at their desk or answering phones at critical times. I would therefore like to remind everyone to look at the handbook regarding the rules and regulations as to your position. Nonetheless, I know I can count on you to adhere to strict punctuality rules that's set by the company, and we can once again return to our premier status as a department. Okay, to me, that's going to get a lot more reaction that's positive than you saying, 5 out of 10 of you weren't at your desk this morning. Right away, it's threatening, it's making suspicion.
Tension level goes straight up the wall.
Absolutely. You get a lot more flies with honey, as they say, to use the cliche. But I mean, really, I deal with people that way, and I think you can get a lot more productivity from people that way.
So now, the corporate classroom. I'm hearing everything about old people like me that you can help, but yet you've been in high schools, I understand.
Absolutely. Last September, when we were just about at the end of, we had done a series of workshops based on our self-study. We have another book called Get a Grip on Business Writing, and it's a self-study version, of this, okay? And so I was going around to various libraries giving 1-hour presentation, and I happened to be in Clinton, and the principal of Clinton High School, Jimmy Hastings, was in the audience, and so he came up to me afterwards and he said, boy, he said, the 6 steps you cover of the U viewpoint, I'd really like you to talk about this with our college-bound juniors and seniors. And he said, could you create a program? I said, absolutely. So we went there in January to Clinton High School, and we had parents, teachers, and the students who were college-bound. And I'm proud to tell you, we really got a wonderful letter of reference from Jamie Cash, the vice principal. I mean, we were so flattered by what she said, because she said everything you said was absolutely invaluable for these students that are heading to college. And again, it derives from these 6 steps that we talk about constantly, because good writing is good writing, okay? No matter whether we're talking personally, professionally, academically, the same concepts go into good writing. Obviously, you tailor it different depending on your audience.
Now, as I learn to write clearer, more effectively, doesn't that carry over to my verbal skills?
Or, conversely, it could take from your wonderful oral language and transfer into your written skills, okay? I mean, we tell people, they'll say, well, how do you become a better writer? And I always say, first of all, read lots and lots of examples of what is considered good writing, okay? Doesn't have to be necessarily books. It can be newspapers, magazine articles, but read and see how people use the language. But don't forget, you have a writing voice and you want to project that. I just did a thing a few years ago, and it's getting a second life. After my mother passed away, I did this for my siblings and my nieces, because I wanted them to have something to take with them for the rest of their lives. And about 2 years before my mother passed away, I asked her to complete a journal, and in this journal I had asked her all sorts of questions that I probably had asked her many times, but I wanted it in writing. Like, who is most like Dad? Who is most like you? what is the one bit of advice you give your grandchildren? Or what are the 3 saddest days of your life? And she put it down, and so right when she gave it to me, actually, the birthday, my birthday's in June, and she passed away the following February, and so that June, she gave it back to me, and I was thrilled. So after she passed away, I put this into a book called Mom in Her Own Words, and we gave it out to family, and then my cousins started asking, and a few neighbors who knew my mother. Well, recently, one of the librarians in Boston said, tell me more about this. Well, again, that's taken on a life of its own, and so Steve and I are now offering memoir writing, where we help people to create their own memoirs and journals so that they can pass that on to their children and grandchildren. And I'll tell you, my mother, I guess she was really a good example, because her writing, she had a writing voice. And one day I was giving a talk on this, and this woman knew my mother. She came up to me and she said, you know what the best part of that was? And I said, what? And she said, it sounds just like Evelyn Kerrigan. And she said, your mother's personality is all over that. Because she did have a writing voice.
If I want to write a memoir, I mean, obviously I have to think about who would read it.
Children.
My children might.
And their children. And people tell me, my sister, for example, she says she takes this book to the beach, she's feeling lonely, she reads it just to remember some of the things my mother said about, because she actually talked about each of the children. I have 2 sisters and I had another brother. He's now deceased, but she talks about each one of us and what she perceived as our gifts. And it's really nice to reread that. You know, so
and then we were doing this memoir writing workshop in a library, a branch library at the West End, and the people there, the stories that they had to tell. I mean, they were just coming in off the street to go to this workshop.
Unbelievable.
And they were actually very unbelievable stories. I mean, someone was coming from Russia with her husband, 2 kids and a dog, and another lady grew up in the North End.
Yes, Rita. And she talked, and it's so interesting to see when she was writing this autobiography or memoir, she was writing about, now mind you, she's about my age, and she's talking about how, you know, she wanted to go to medical school, but she was dissuaded by her family because, you know, she should get married, have kids. And this is not that many years ago. And then this woman that Steve alluded to, her husband was coming to, not to study, to teach at Harvard University. And she talked about the final day, and it was still the Soviet Union. She had us all on, I mean, really on edge, just listening to her experience getting on that plane. It all involved the day at the airport. But it was terrific writing. And so, because people are writing about what they know and what they feel, and that is the best thing in the world. And even at work, you know, if you have passion, it's going to come across in your writing.
Yeah, and you think about it, because you mentioned, you'd never say, oh, per our discussion, Stephen.
Yeah.
You know, okay, how awkward does that sound? But people don't realize that it sounds just as awkward if it's in print.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And a lot of company materials are written in the third person. The company has instructed all employees, or, you know, the corporation deems it valuable to, and it's like, enough. Start talking with you and your, and our, and my, and I, because that's the way we would talk conversationally. You know, so.
Now, you start with college-bound kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some of the essays. Sometimes I have a hard time believing that a 4.0 student can't write English.
Ooh. I taught English in high school, and I can tell you, I was amazed. They would throw essays on my desk with coffee spilled all over it and say, wait a minute, this is, you know, going to be graded. You're going to be evaluated. So that was well, this is a reflection of you. You don't want this. That's why, if I may, when this just got done, what was it, 2 months ago? A teacher friend of mine, she said, I think this is great for college-bound kids. She said, if I were still teaching English, and she taught in Massachusetts in high school, and she said, I would require that every kid take this to college, because what we did, we took the compilation of guidelines that we've acquired over the years, and we put the most the most difficult, the situations that really confound people and really confuse them. And we try to simplify it so that there's 3 parts: vocabulary development, language usage, and punctuation. And in each one of these, we have sections devoted to the things that are most commonly used incorrectly. And like
Yeah.
pronouns, and people saying, starting out with he and then they say they, and we explain that you can do that in an informal sense, but when you're writing, you want to make sure that you stay singular with singular, plural with plural. But there are other examples in here that we.
Whom.
I'm sorry.
Who and whom?
Who and whom? Oh, and the biggie.
The witch hunt, or?
Bad and badly. Okay, and people will always bring this up in a workshop. They'll say, is it correct to say I feel badly? I said, no, it's not, unless you mean.
Yeah, I'm feeling it.
Yeah, you like, I type poorly is correct. And so if you say I feel poorly, it means your hand, the sensation of touching.
What's a poorly?
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you feel poorly, tell me what's a
So
poorly.
I correct them, I say, it should be, I feel bad, okay? And, that's an adjective, whereas badly is an adverb, okay? And that should follow when you're referring to the sense of touch, okay? And then the other one, and we point this out in the book, again, it's such a common mistake, lie and lay. But it helps to remember that if you put the 2 words up, L-I-E and L-A-Y, the first one, L-I-E, really in the present tense refers to a human being or anything that's moving like an animal. Whereas lay, L-A-Y, has to do with inanimate objects. So you say, I laid the book down. Yesterday, I laid the book down. All right? Whereas you would say, now I'm going to lie down. Yesterday, I lay down, or I have, and people say, well, this sounds weird. It does, but it's correct. I have lain on the couch all afternoon, okay? Whereas I have laid the tile in the bathroom, okay? Those are the differences, but little things like that we're trying to show so that a student, for example, who needs to use bad and badly in their essays or any other writing will use it correctly. Because again, and I said this in the beginning, the people in the corporations that we deal with, they're saying, why are we getting these very bright kids who can't write? And we say, because there's a disconnect between what the teachers know about English and what the English that is needed by the supervisors and the managers of these new employees. And that's why we're trying to make that bridge. That's why we're on a mission to make the writing helpful to everyone.
The kids going to college, we have a friend, and she is a professor of art history at a college in Chicago. And for years, she's been complaining about the inability of college students to write a coherent sentence.
Yes.
And this is a major Jesuit college.
We can say it. It's Loyola University. And she does say that. She'll say, we're getting the creme of students, and yet they need these skills. And it's like, wait a minute, how did they get through high school? And I have a difficult time with that, having been a former teacher, because I just think it's really, really important. But we're getting so far away from it. I mean, how many people write thank you notes anymore? And I mean,
real
thank you note. I mean, my siblings and I, we were drilled by my mother and father. you will sit down and you'll write a thank you note to your aunt or uncle, whatever. And I really think we're missing something by not saying that. I taught GED a few years ago at the Charlestown Housing Projects, and I was up there explaining writing, whatever, and I used the whiteboard, and I'm up there, and I think I'm a pretty good writer of penmanship when I'm on a big board. Otherwise, it looks like I'm a serial killer because it's so scratchy. But anyway, I'm up there and I'm writing cursively, and this woman, young woman, probably about 16, raised her hand, and she said, "Can you not do that?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Can you print everything out? I can't understand any of this." How did she get through the system? And I found out later that some of the schools were not teaching cursive. Well, I know in Massachusetts, in many school districts, they still teach cursive writing, okay?
So they only teach printing?
She couldn't understand writing in longhand. It was like, what?
That's amazing.
It is
because
amazing
if
to
you
me.
get into the business world and you get a note from somebody,
Yes.
what are you going to do? You're going to go and say, "I'm sorry, I'm semi-illiterate, I can't read."
How do they go to a museum and enjoy reading the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution when they see, replicas of those documents? Just a very funny thing. One of my idols is William Safire. He passed away a number of years ago, but he was a grammar maven at the New York Times. But he has been such a champion for me because people will say, "What?" And this is, again, from teachers who really maybe knew their field but didn't really know English. And they were telling a lot of these students, "Well, you never start a sentence with and." And he says, "What's wrong with and?" And his example, and I thought, wow, this is great stuff. It's called, the name of the book, by the way, is Fumble Rules. And it's out of print, but if you ever see it, get it. It's terrific. But in this section about using and, William Safire says, "I can't think of anything more powerful than what these words say," written by Abraham Lincoln. And then the war came. How powerful is that? He said, knowing the tragedy that lay ahead. I mean, it's just so powerful. And the same thing, people say, "Well, you're not such a sentence with but." Yeah, you can. If it follows up and it's a dramatic entrance to carry on the thought, absolutely. And the other thing is, and I thought, because I'm always worried about dependent clauses, like you try to get people to vary, go independent, then go dependent, And anyway, I thought this is great. He said, someone had asked him apparently, is there a set limit on words in a dependent sentence? And he said, no. He said, and someone was questioning this. He said, well, why don't you go back to Thomas Jefferson and read the Declaration of Independence. And I went back, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one nation. And if you read that, that's all one dependent clause until you get to the end where the comma is. And of course, it was pretty good. It's lasted over 250 years. I think we'll stick with that.
But think about if you were in a normal English class and you strung together 30 words.
Yes.
You get hit.
Absolutely.
I mean, I just can't imagine I could string together that many words and my English teacher wouldn't have said, seriously, break that up.
Yes. And I understand that because you want, especially in business too, you want it to be a quick read, long, short, long, whatever, okay? And you don't want it to drag. But my overriding principle for all writers, of course, write what you know, write with passion, and you certainly should write where you're conveying your personality. So if you're the kind of person who really likes to do short, long, short, or a few long to explain something, well, go ahead and do it. That's your personality. Get it on paper. But that doesn't absolve you of being cloudy or incorrect in your writing. You still have to be as clear as you can be.
And I think that's one of the ways we rationalize. I'm a techie. I'm not supposed to write correctly.
Yeah.
But
How do you?
Wow, you're going to be sitting at your desk doing code for the rest of your life, unless you can figure out how
if
to.
you can't crystallize a thought, how do I know you're not writing spaghetti code? I hate to say it, but when I see memos or something from engineers that ramble and go on and on, I gotta wonder. It's like, candidly, if I got a memo with a coffee stain, boy, that would scare me about how seriously do you take your work.
Exactly. Well, what would you say that about technical people and conveying, something that's really interesting to read? What's the answer?
They have to sort of lose all the lessons they learned in the technology courses to agree, and just think, how would you explain, like the example, how would you explain it to your mother?
Yes.
And if your mother didn't understand it, then probably no one else is going to understand it.
See, I think a lot of people do take that attitude that you just expressed, Al, which is to say, oh well, that's really not my strength. Well, that doesn't excuse you. You're contributing to this company, and so you're a reflection of our company. That's why we tell people in customer service when we're doing groups of them, it isn't because you're annoyed. You have to think, how is this person going to regard the company after they read this?
Well, but I pay my coders for function,
Yep.
not by the pound.
Right.
I don't care how many lines you wrote. Actually, I think the fewer the better, because if I ever have to
Probably
troubleshoot
is
it,
true, right?
Yes.
Yes.
when people, I wrote 9 billion lines of code for this. Really? He wrote, 1,000.
Yeah.
Which one do I value more? If I run into a problem, I'd rather have to look through.
And I came from a school situation, like when I was younger, the more was better, okay? Because if you flowered it up and just added all these superlatives or adjectives, well, it was like, wow, he really knows how to write. That's ridiculous. Get to the point, and again, say what you have to say. And while I'm on that subject, and I also say this during our workshops, good grammar is not synonymous with good writing. What good grammar does, it elevates the writing, it makes it easier to read, it makes it more interesting to read, because again, of what we've been talking about, we've used punctuation correctly, commas. People know, okay, I'm going to slow down, and when you read this out loud, it sounds very melodious because they punctuated correctly. But it also, the punctuation, those marks serve as guideposts. So they're telling the reader, this is really where you slow down and think about it. This is where I really want you to absorb this thought, or this is something that's really, really important, between dashes, say. Okay, and that's why we use them sparingly, because that's reserved for things that are really important.
Now, what do you say when somebody says, I'm too old to learn new skills?
Baloney. I'm still learning, and I'm, been away from school for a long time, and I'm still learning. And I hope that I continue.
Well, I agree with that. But I think, if you're that kind of a person, then maybe you need to get a hobby.
Well, I'd bring it up to say, okay, so we grew up on Fortran 4.
Yeah. That's
Okay, I don't know how many positions are available
probably
for people
zero.
who wrote, unless you're in big accounting, COBOL.
Yeah.
Okay, there's probably a dozen people out there that are critical to keep, code written by Paul Revere alive.
Mm-hmm.
But that's always my answer is, what do you mean you're too old? How can you be an engineer? If you're not using the current technology, you're going to go design me the best 486 in the world? Great. Who cares?
You mentioned biotech, right? Okay, I would think there's a lot of human factors that come into biotech industries, because they're dealing with things that are going to affect people's longevity and their health, okay? So whenever that component in biotech information shows people how it really relates to their health, longevity, or their children's health and longevity, then you're really making it interesting. But the problem is people, they don't really picture an audience when they're writing, and you have to picture someone in your mind when you're writing, even someone you've never met. You have to conjure up someone who's reading it so that it sounds like you are addressing a person.
So if I want to learn more, where do I go?
Well, you can attend one of our workshops.
Or
corporate
you can go to
classrooms.
www.corporateclassrooms.com.
So the first place to start is to go on the website, corporateclassrooms.com.
Yeah, and you'll see a biography of Steve Wells and Kim Kerrigan, and it tells the history of the company. And it also, we're starting to put in additional information, articles that have appeared in newspapers, like the Worcester Telegram article that appeared recently, and also maybe writing that I've done or Steve has done. Those are starting to appear.
Now, if I live here at the center of the universe, for visitors, we let people know, 28,000 people know Milford's the center of the universe.
Yep.
6 billion need to be educated. But here I am in Milford. I want to go to a corporate classroom seminar.
In Milford, if I understand the population correctly, there's a lot of people here whose parents have probably emigrated from another country.
Yes.
And so, and we're very familiar with that because we've had so many diverse groups over the years. Chinese, Koreans, Egyptians, Moroccans, Japanese, and so many people say, wow, you made it so clear. Where were you when I
first came?
Yeah, and again, we try to make it fun. And just for, this is just something I do in the beginning, and see if you can answer. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but we'll say, they're like here, they have spelling rules, okay? But that doesn't always work. Rules are not always available for all words. So we say to people, for example, there's only one word in the English language that ends with S-E-D-E. Do you know what it is?
No.
There's 350,000 words at our disposal in the English language, right?
So what word?
Supersede. And now they're allowing you to spell it with C-E-D-E, but up until maybe 20 years ago, that was the correct spelling.
Well, fascinating way to end.
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
And again, go to corporateclassrooms.com if you want to learn, and hopefully you'll see some people from Milford come out. To our 6 loyal viewers, thank you for joining us. May tomorrow be a clearer day than today. May God bless. Good night. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much, Al. We really appreciate it. It's a pleasure. Absolutely.